Welcome to another episode of the Hermit's podcast here. I want to take a moment up front to say thank you to everybody who listens to this podcast. I've been hearing a lot of lovely feedback, which just does my little heart good. And I also have been hearing a lot of great stuff from people who are enjoying the Patreon. So this episode, as with all of the episodes this year and going forward, comes with bonus material. In this particular case, it is a short conversation on listening to birds and how to hear them properly between Enrique and I, followed by a song that Enrique recorded in a special place. So that's on the Patreon only. If you pledge $5 an episode, you can get access to that. I also want to take this moment to announce that starting in April, there's going to be a new group for folks who are pledging to support the podcast at the $10 level. This will be a space where you will get earlier access and all that regular stuff that you get for being a bonus at the lower levels, but you will also get to participate in a group with other folks who listen to the podcast, myself, and certainly some of the guests, to ask questions, to have deeper conversations collectively about it, as well as I will be sharing supplementary materials that I come across that seem particularly relevant to some of the episodes at hand. So check that out. Feel free to change your pledge at any time. However, the group itself will not start until the beginning of April. Thanks for listening as always. Welcome to another episode of the Hermit's podcast. I am here today with Enrique Enriquez. How do you introduce Enrique? I think that we could say that they maybe are a poet, that they are maybe a magician. Perhaps it's easiest to say that they are an emissary for the nation of birds. But they're a person who does a lot of things. They've been on before a couple of times. So if you enjoy this, definitely dig out the previous episodes. I think that they're well worth listening to. So, but how are you introducing yourself these days, Enrique?
I don't know, Andrew. It's always very good to see you. And I always find it problematic to record these things with you because I feel so at ease with you that I always worry that nothing will come out of it, Uh-huh. It's like just two friends hanging out.
Yeah.
But no,
I think that could actually be like the subtitle for the Hermit's Land podcast. Just a couple friends hanging out and talking about stuff. I think that's every episode,
Yes, mm-hmm. Which is beautiful. No, I don't know. I went to see a friend of mine the other day. She was visiting New York, and I had to meet with her. The only chance I had to meet with her was at this art gallery, like an opening that she was somehow related to. And I arrived there. She grabbed me by the arm, and she walked me around the room, introducing me to every single person as a magician. Mm. And at first I flinched, and then I flinched a little bit more. And then I thought, well, she's a philosopher. She's smart. She probably knows what she's doing. Mm. Maybe she has reasons to call me a magician, but I don't know.
Well, maybe we should, we'll contact her and ask her what that reason was. We can share that somewhere afterwards. Or maybe it's best not to know, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think names should be given,
Mm. Yeah.
We are given a name when we are born, and then maybe we are given other names by other realities, people, institutions. Yeah. Organizations, and it's the same thing. It's better for the name to be something that is given to you, and maybe you get to live up to it.
Mm. I think that resonates for me. I always felt like in this era of social media and online presence that I should come up with some pithy, witty catchy thing to refer to myself as, other than, what do you do? Well, I read tarot cards. There's so many people who have these great slogans and catchphrases and so on. But I've never come up with one, and I've given up after 17 years. I think it's plenty of time to give up on that process. But I remember being in China a couple of years ago, where I was doing some teaching and doing readings with my friend Carrie, and we was talking to this woman who, she was talking to me about her guru, right? And she was like, well, how long have you been reading cards for? And I was like, well, I've been reading cards for about 30 years and, professionally for whatever it was at that time and so on. And she's like, oh, so you're like a grandmaster then. And I was like, and immediately my response was, I'm like, I don't know, maybe you should ask Carrie if that's true or not. Because I didn't want it, like you say, I flinched, right? But I've thought about that moment a lot since then. And I think that acknowledgement from the community or from people of it, or the bestowing of that name from people, is actually where maybe the real power is. There are lots of people who, post, they sign off with Supreme Grand Master of Tarot, or, whatever, so on and so on. And maybe it's true, but I think when it comes from the outside, it approximates truth more closely.
I completely agree. And I mean, I was moved by my friend's gesture, because I felt, okay, maybe I have done something to deserve to be called a magician. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that, as long as it's not me who is the one saying that's what I am. Mm-hmm. But I don't worry about, I don't know, names or labels. I think, that's the problem with some words that really turn reality opaque in that way, in which then nothing else can be seen through that name. People just give things a name to kind of put a stop to having to think about them.
Right. Yeah. I'm an Aquarius. I'm a Reiki master. I'm a whatever.
Yes.
Right? Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to share with you a bird story.
Okay.
So seeing as birds is a thing we definitely share a common interest in. So, and maybe I've told this on the podcast before now. I can't remember it now. But last October, I ended a long relationship, and sort of a day or two after I ended it, I found a bird nest on the ground with 3 robin eggs in it that were all broken. And so I looked at it and I was like, yep, that's the end of something. And I saved it. I brought it in and I made sure it was dry, and it's around here somewhere. I kept it. And, I felt this sort of very clear acknowledgement from that other side about this situation, right? And then maybe 2 months later, I was walking through this laneway that I walked through to get to my studio most of the time. And I saw a pigeon with what looked like a branch stuck over its head. And I was like, how am I gonna convince this pigeon to let me free it from this thing that it's got? And when I got a bit closer, I realized that it was in fact not trapped, but it was. Sorry, I'm gonna pause this. Edit this out afterwards. Restarting now. I saw that it was in fact not trapped, but it was holding the branch in its mouth. And it was a pretty big branch, so it looked like part of it wrapped around its head and so on. And as I got closer, it flew up and it circled, and instead of flying away, or instead of flying to one of the many perches on the building that the pigeons like in that area, it circled above me. a couple of times. And as it did so, it dropped the branch and it fell right into my hands. I didn't have to reach out for it or anything. It fell into my hands because I thought it was going to hit me in the face. And so I saved that, and I as this sort of like, oh, now here's the beginning of that new nest, right? Here's the beginning of that new thing. So there's my bird story for you.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for telling me. No, I never heard that before. So, and it's just perfect. I mean, the weird condition of signs is that they are at the same time part of the landscape and an exception to the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are there all the time, right? But then there is a moment when that particular image, which would have been irrelevant otherwise, gets active for you, right? And then there is something beautiful about the way that they give consistency to themselves. Because the second sign, so to speak, the pigeon with the branch on his beak, is even more relevant because you found the nest 2 months prior.
But there's a symmetry to it, right?
Yes. And I think that the most important thing I learned from tarot cards is that the space in between the cards is made out of time. On the table, we don't see that because it happens really fast. And in fact, all oracles are tools for us to accelerate time. But that space, that time is I mean, the more we look at cards, the wider it becomes. So we can inhabit that space in between the images. And then we realize, oh, but that space is life. And the images are happening all the time. So there is a card that is the nest with the 3 broken eggs. And then there is a card that there is the pigeon with the branch on his beak. And you're just in the space in between. The key, I think, is to know how to wait. And I'm more and more convinced that waiting, which is, of course, a very active stance of paying attention, is the greatest oracle. That's the oracular state is a state of waiting.
Yeah, I think that capacity to be present and open but not fixated is really important, right? You know, to magic, to divination, to listening to birds, to all of the things, right?
Yeah. I mean, I spent the weekend talking to some crows in Massachusetts, and I think that one very important thing for me is that, I mean, one day I was just there having a conversation with a crow across the street on the main street of this little town, and somebody wanted to know what the crow was saying. And then some other day I saw these crows and I started calling on them, and they came and they drew a circle above my head. They were talking to me, but basically drawing this beautiful circle on top of me. And what I find, or what I encounter all the time, is that people then want for me to provide some sort of ornithological conclusion. I talk to the birds because somehow now I'm going to learn something about crows. And I have no ornithological interest. To me, those events like the nest you found or the bird with the branch on its beak, those are emblems for the language of the bird, which is precisely this ability to merge with time by paying attention to the rhythm of the world. So of course, I'm just putting these images in the world, and somehow they add up. Because yes, signs somehow they punctuate reality. So the text goes on. I mean, maybe in 2 months you will find, I don't know what, but some sort of branch related image.
Sure.
That will, situate you in that moment.
Well, I think that people are often, and I at times have often, been in a hurry to arrive at, meaning or, definition or so on, right? And I think that that's if one of the powers of reading tarot cards is the space, one of the dangers is the definition, right? Because to me, the definition of things is a thing that comes in time, right? And I think that, especially at some point in my sort of ceremonial magic career, I just sort of started to treat meetings, messages, things that came. I'm like, well, we'll see what that means in time. Maybe in a few years I'll know what that means. Maybe in a few years it'll feel true still. We'll see, right? And that sort of openness to it allows for change, which might actually be the most important part of the process, as opposed to definition, which is comforting or has the appearance of comfort, but doesn't really necessarily always, or maybe even often, benefit us in a bigger picture sense.
Yeah, in fact, my suspicion at the moment is that if we have a question and we need the answer right away, that means that's the wrong question. I think that there is a tension in our culture between motivation and acceptance. We want our spiritual materials, so to speak, the things we consume within the frame of the spiritual, to provide motivation, so we feel that we can tackle life or go and do things, and accomplish something, and that which people call inspiration. And I think that it's very important to focus on acceptance, which is not only fundamentally the acceptance of the dignity of that thing that is before us, good or bad, but also the acceptance of a bigger picture, of a wider pattern that is taking place. And one way of naming that will be change, as you are doing, is time, right? And understanding that everything is simply happening. And of course, for me personally, and I'm not suggesting people should do that, I will also say everything is happening and I don't matter, which gives me a lot of freedom. It's not about me. I understand that for people, well, a lot of them need to be the center of the circle. But in any case, yes, you become a witness of reality, and somehow you realize that then you are reality too. And then we also become part of the landscape and an exception to the landscape now and then.
Well, certainly we can become an oracle to other people, right? As a presence in the landscape and an exception to it. So, but I'm very curious about this idea as it relates to the more, I completely relate to it from a spiritual perspective, from a practice perspective, even from my perspective as being a person who does readings for other people. To me, all of those things, I completely relate to it.
Yes.
I'm curious how you relate that back to the more mundane, but also miraculous things. Like you're a parent, right? How does that idea trickle back into parenthood for you, or into your relationship, or into your, those sort of day-to-day domestic parts of your life?
Well, I always tell people that the fact that I can speak like a bird doesn't mean that I don't have to do laundry, And of course, in New York, that basically means that you have to grab this bag of dirty clothes and go out. In most places in New York, you don't have this laundry machines in your apartment. So you have to actually go 1-2 blocks. It doesn't matter if it's winter, snowing, to these places where in the movies there is always fantastic sex happening at night, but I go in the morning, so it's really boring. And so a daily pursuit of some sort of let's call it the sublime, to be with your head in the clouds, thinking about birds and words and signs and oracles. At some point, I think that gives dignity to things like doing laundry. And I remember I used to hate that particular thing, going out to do laundry. It's just extraordinarily boring. And then I realized, well, this is somehow the counterweight, right? I mean, I need this thing. I need the kids. I need the fact that they are hungry or bored, because otherwise I would just disappear, right? So you need that reality to keep you in tension. I mean, that verticality we are all aspiring at is only reached if you have an above and a below. So yeah, I appreciate those things now. I go to do my laundry in a suit because I feel that there is a extraordinary dignity in doing that too. And the same with everything. I think it's very hard to accept the dignity of the things we don't like, because I suspect that at the end we are all guided by our aesthetic preferences. I mean, we have an idea of what's beautiful, and then we pursue that, and everything else is wrong for us, right? But I do feel that the mundane has that weight, and that's what it is. It's a weight that keeps you grounded. What I don't do is to focus any oracular pursuit on the mundane. I mean, I think that there are questions that have no form and they manifest as intuitions, and they are not being named. You don't know what they are. So science could be useful to somehow point you in that, in some sort of direction, but daily life takes care of itself. It works like clockwork. So I don't agonize over over children, family, school, I don't know, housing, work. I think those things will happen anyway. I mean, the ground is there. The problem is how high can you fly? So the ground is always there.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things. It's always an interesting question for me, right? And I am a person who points oracles at mundane things, but not regularly. Like sometimes, and when necessary. But I tend to, my daily practice. It had sort of drifted to this sort of general question: how do I show up fully today? As my sort of question to the cards. And at some point in the last 6 months or so, the question has just disappeared, and it just becomes this sort of open time, in a way that I imagine, like you with your pen and your notebook and letters and images and cards, and where is it going? What is it? Who knows? It is what it is. And at the end, maybe there's something concrete that you could point at or show about it, but often it's just much more ephemeral than all of that,
Yes, I mean, very often it's just about lengthening the day. And again, to me, that has to do with the idea of becoming one with time. It's not really about finding a solution or an answer, because it's not even about asking a question. It's just about being present. And of course, I like this idea of a symbolic world that is there and it's not there. It's real and it's not real, right? It's overimposed on the real world or daily life, and it becomes more dense or more subtle depending on when and where we are. And I like to be a witness to that world, but many times it's the very act of witnessing the life of form what provides some sort of benefit or a sense of being okay. Mm-hmm. It doesn't give you, and I will, maybe this is very abstract, so to put a very concrete example, I am completely convinced that what really helps when we look at cards is not the images themselves, it's not the words we use to describe the images, it's not the answers we get, it's the experience of looking at them. It's the consistency in the pattern of the images. It's the pure sensuous experience of images that makes us feel better. And somehow feeling better is not just a sensation. It's that sense of truth, like it's like when you feed a bird and you understand that you know something and you don't have to even to be able to express it, but you know it. There's pure knowledge in that. And I think, and it's the same. I mean, yes.
It reminds me. So I recently just reacquired a bicycle after having my bicycle stolen near the start of the year. The joys of living in a large city, right? And speaking of things that can be tremendously grounding, but not in a desirable way. But this conversation and the idea of the influence of reading cards, it reminds me of, I live in Toronto, which is, a city of tall buildings and less open spaces and so on. And one of the ways in which I really have noticed that at other times is if I'm cycling across town, like maybe 20, 30 minutes to a friend's place. And when I leave the house, if the moon catches my eye, for example, you go and it's like, oh, look at the beautiful full moon tonight. And then you cycle along and then you cross University Avenue and the buildings have this open pathway and suddenly there's the moon again. And then, a little bit later as you sort of get out sort of past Bathurst where the buildings start to get shorter and you're like, oh, there's the moon again. And having a reading is like that initial connection where you see the moon, you go, oh, it makes you stop, right? Time stops for that moment. Look at it and you're like, look at it, beautiful, and oh, look at the color of the sky. For me, it always trickles out into a bunch of things usually, right? Once I notice a thing like that, it's at the very least a minute or two of me just sort of gazing upwards and feeling the expansiveness of that experience. And then having a reading then sort of flows through into those other points through time where that process returns to us, whether through the images or the words or the idea or memory. And it echoes that trip across town of that reconnecting with, what I would call with the moon, sort of a sublime experience, but certainly the metaphysical or transformative experience of having a reading.
Yes, well, because again, I think that the reading or the experience of the cards is just part of a continuum of signs that are somehow being insisted upon us. So yes, maybe the reading is that space where we frame our attention and say, oh, this is meaningful. But basically, the moon that you're looking at in the cards is the one that will reappear then, behind a building. And the same thing what happens with the idea of, the tower, people breaking apart, and then you will see two people walking in different directions, or you will see a chain that somehow snaps, and you realize, oh, it's the same idea. The same idea is being insisted upon me. I mean, I don't think that there is any example that will top your example with the nest and then the pigeon at the branch. It's the same idea. You're just you have a mindset and a series of concerns or a way of being in the world. And then reality is just giving you these things in a way to say, well, this is how things are. This is where you are. This is who you are. And I think the cards are a great training tool for that. Mm-hmm. I mean, these days I'm thinking that the oracle of the future will be a person who has a hole puncher in one hand and a stack of blank cards on the other. So when the person comes with a question or, big anxieties about something, the person just punch a hole in the card and give it to them. Mm-hmm. And that's the oracle. Mm-hmm. And, to me, there are two, in terms of oracles, to me, two things are very important. One is that initial definition of the oracle as an opaque statement, mm-hmm. which by extension then names the person who gives or delivers those statements. Mm-hmm. And the other one is Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, when he wrote, "The oracle neither reveals nor conceals, but gives signs," which to me is the most useful model to understand what I do. Mm-hmm. So there is this idea of punching a hole in a blank card and giving it to the other person so they can see through. And of course, the idea of through, which in French means hole to, and is the beginning of trouver, which is to find. And then the card, which there is a French word, lame, which you can use for, in Spanish, it's very easy, it's lamina. In English, you don't have an exact word like that. But in any case, it's a word for card. So you can have the card, which is this lamb, and lambs sounds like lamb, which is the soul. So the idea of punching a hole in the soul so you can see through is all implicit in the act of handing somebody something that basically allows them to focus their attention in a very narrow point.
I love it. In my, as you were speaking about it, I was picturing you in a fancy tent somewhere at an event with people lined up outside. Be like, just stack of cards and your hole puncher, and just be like,
yeah,
don't tell me anything. Or, here you go, done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at the end, of course, if we think about an oracle as an opaque statement, well, the statement is the whole, and then the opaque is the actual card, right? Mm-hmm. Making a statement in the opaque is like a way of playing with that idea of the opaque statement. But I mean, currently, I'm very happy applying the same thoughts to just making bird sounds, and well, I think we talked about that last time.
Mm-hmm. Are you reading cards anymore these days, or much? No, you put
no, not at all. I have a very daily engagement with the cards because I teach people how to look at them, and I have kind of fine-tuned my practice. So we only look at the trumps of the Tarot de Marseille, which is the card I'm interested in. And it really becomes a way to understand a poetic structure that if or when it takes a hold on you, then you can find in the world to the point that you no longer need the cards. But the basis is that we look at cards and we talk about them. And then I have learned, because of that work with people, we usually don't work with questions. We don't use questions in our practice. Mm-hmm. We just look at the cards and we describe what we see. Mm-hmm. And I realized that in time, that work has a benefit for those who engage with it, which is not only learning how to read the cards, is that they feel better, which again confirms my idea that exposing ourselves to this rhythm of the images is in itself a beneficial thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't read them, but when people, please.
Well, when I created the Land of the Sacred Self Oracle, which is a sort of black and white surrealist oracle deck that I made.
Yes, yeah.
I remember
it.
Created it with that intention, right? So it's like I created it not with the goal that people would look at them and be like, this is what it means. Oh, here's my affirmation for the day, or here's the concrete or the opaque thing that I can arrive at. But instead, as a whole, through a card into another world for people, where they could have experiences and engage with them, and whenever I work with people, the experience is the same. The initial response is, I have no idea what's going on in this. And I'm like, great, that's perfect. Now let's look at it. Now let's talk about it. Now let's open up that space so we can go through it. And at some point in that journey, they tend to feel better and have a sense of direction or what have you. And sometimes that is very communicable, and sometimes it's not, And I think that the idea that we sort of can need an answer that we can express concretely to other people, or we failed, is not always true. I think there are times when it's true, or where that's what's required. But I think as a sort of bigger picture practice, opening up and engaging in that mystery is really what allows us to let the oracle reveal itself to us, which is always something that's outside of being able to clearly articulate the scope of what it means.
Yes, I mean, a sign should either deliver some sort of knowledge, which I will optimally call poetic knowledge. That means that it's maybe not even, again, possible to express it in words. It's just this understanding that you get about the way certain aspects of reality coincide or work. Mm-hmm. Or the oracle or the sign, will be a call to action. And I don't mean that in practical terms. I mean it in an emotional way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes something touches you and you feel that you're ready to do something, or you're ready not to do it, or you are somehow ready to take a stance. And it's a purely emotional response to a sign you have been given. Mm. So most of that exists outside of rational analysis. Mm-hmm. And I feel even sometimes, people say, well, I saw you in a dream and you told me, like, for example, you taught me how to read the cards, but I don't remember anything you said. Or you told me something and it was very important, but I don't remember the words. And I feel very happy because I think that the whatever that was, it's not meant to be put into language. Mm-hmm. It's just there. It's pure poetic knowledge. Mm-hmm. At the end, I always feel the same thing. We're trying to figure out how to live, and that pretty much means we are trying to protect our psyche from the daily grind. Mm-hmm. There is life throwing all this nonsense at us, and we are trying to remain somehow whole. Mm-hmm. And I think signs, oracles, they can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the idea of definition of self is one that, when it's rooted in language, like when I was trying to come up with the fantastic phrase to communicate the fullness of what I offer to people through divination, that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, maybe it does for some people, but I've never understood it. It doesn't go anywhere for me. And but this sort of sense of the fullness of ourselves, right? And the sense of the fullness of sharing that with someone else, or experiencing it with the birds or the moon, or, in whatever ways, those things can be enduring in ways and solve problems in ways that sort of definitions around language rarely seem to, or don't seem to, and it reminds me, so however many years ago I started this podcast. I started the podcast because I had been thinking about my last year of working with clients and thinking about what I called my successes and not successes with those people. And the question that I had was, why do some people change and why do other people stay the same? And, and so like the first half dozen episodes of this are me asking various, very seasoned card readers that question. And I think that hearing what you sort of just said, actually to me feels like it is actually probably the clearest answer, that people need some emotional or internal shift to happen that isn't rooted in language or explanation and isn't necessarily accessible through language or rationality or explanation. And until, or if ever, that thing happens where Enrique and I appear in your dream and you can't remember anything, but suddenly you wake up desiring to make a shift in your life. Until that unpredictable piece emerges, we can seek that experience, we can foster it, but we can't guarantee that it happens, neither as diviners nor as people, right?
Absolutely. And I like to think, I mean, going back to this idea of the magician, a friend wrote to me and asked me, "Are you a magician? I need magic." And I told her that I do slow of hand. Mm-hmm. So I believe, or I'm interested in the idea of magic, which is not the imposition of a will, mm-hmm. but the absence of a will. So you make yourself present. Your presence has an effect in reality, even if you don't want to. Mm-hmm. And then you wait. Mm. And there is a lot of magic that happened that way. But of course, maybe this is the beginning of a magic trick. And we wouldn't know until tomorrow or the next year. Mm. And I'm okay with it. Mm-hmm. Of course, again, going back to your initial comment, there is no way to create a slogan to market that in a powerful way, which I think speaks to the honesty of the premise. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think we are obviously rooted in language, and actually we become subtle through language. I mean, language is this thing that happens in our body, and as the air goes out, and we reshape it with our mouths and tongue and teeth, it goes off. And as soon as it's out there, it acquires a metaphysical consistency. Mm. So there is something remarkable happening there. But it doesn't mean that it's everything, And as you were saying, it's not until we have an emotional response that we are ready to change or to move or to basically experience other things. And perhaps a paradox that I find in the current world is that when we talk about emotions, we confuse that with sentimentality. So we have countless books and posters and memes and pictures that have this, sugary tone, because somehow they are going to appeal to your emotions. And to appeal to our emotions, we don't need the pillow in muffling the shot of the gun. Mm. We just need the full blast. Mm. And there is that thing in the I don't know how to call it, the spiritual, the new age world, that is all about muffling the sound, making it comfortable, making it safe, which is the perfect recipe for nothing to change.
Well, I mean, we've been touching on the idea of the sublime, and the sublime, especially in like sort of landscape painting and that sort of historical stuff, where people were working on that notion, right? That it was rooted in this idea that something was so grand and inconceivably large compared to our personal smallness that it evoked a sense of awe or overwhelmedness and opened us up to a sense of our place in the universe. And there's a degree of, at the least, anxiety in that, maybe of something much stronger too, right? It doesn't need to be comfortable. And it maybe sometimes can't even be comfortable, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, if you're comfortable in your chair, you won't stand up. Yes. Somehow something has to happen. That chair has to get hot, or a nail has to poke through, and then you spring out of it and do something. Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, when talking about the sublime, I guess that my main interest, which is this notion of the language of the birds, which has nothing to do with ornithology or science, but mm-hmm. it has to do with precisely with some sort of longing for a return to some sort of ideal state, which is that we could use that word. It's the state of the sublime, right? I mean, this idea of the language of the birds as the original language or the secret language. Mm-hmm. So the idea of a return to the beginning, and the idea that somehow that beginning is some sort of paradise, right? Which is again a place of longing. We look at a bird and it's almost consistently the bird elicits the longing for a promise that the bird is not making, but that we really feel is there for us, that we can achieve that return to that ideal state, state of freedom, state of weightless, state of beauty. And I think we are all somehow exiles from that place. And yes, we are all looking for a way back,
Mm-hmm. So, as always, I post on Facebook and ask if people have questions, right? And one of the questions that somebody asked was, how do you really listen to the birds? How does that happen? And I'm wondering if you have a suggestion for people, especially if this is a newer concept for people. What people might do to begin this journey if they're inspired by this conversation?
Well, I'm happy to report that I just finished teaching a class about the language of the birds. Mm-hmm. That happened with me entirely talking like a bird. Uh-huh. Every Monday I would send a lesson, which was a recording of me talking like a bird. And then people had to listen and to transcribe that. And that took several different routes, right? And something very fortunate that happened is that, mimicking birds implies understanding that we hear with our memory. The ear has a memory, and that's how when you rub wood against steel, you can hear a bird chirping. And Gaston Bachelard, the French writer, has this beautiful idea that the birds learn to chirp by listening to a stream of water.
Okay.
And again, if you can see it. If you hear the stream of water, the bubbling could be chirping. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about something that is so extraordinarily concrete and is formed, right? I hear to the birds in terms of material. I hear to the birds, and I'm all the time wondering, does that sound like rubber, like wood, like metal? Mm-hmm. How can I speak that language? But also, one of the effects that this class had in some people was precisely that then they will be walking around and they will hear the brakes of a bus, mm-hmm. and hear a bird, recognize the same. It's, again, memory, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what I'm trying to say maybe is that we need to listen to the concrete, to the actual form of the sound. And then, to me, this has been even more important. We need to listen to the void inside the voice of the bird, to the negative space, to the silence. And this is key when you are actually trying to mimic a bird, because yes, you have the chirp and somehow you can make that, but then the rhythm only happens if you listen to how many times the bird stops. And that space could very well be the same space that you are walking on when you're, between the nest and the pigeon. So it's always about situating yourself in that space.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes, Charles Bernstein, this American poet, has a fantastic essay on homophonic translation, and he talks about birdsong, or he talks about this idea that poets have always wanted to talk like birds. So the idea of taking bird sounds and translating them into human words. Something that, for example, another American poet, Robert Grenier, did in the past. He has all these sentences for the birds, which are human sentences, but they can be kind of retraced back into the sounds of the birds around his home in Vermont. So you can also do that. You can also try to find in the voice of the bird that which is familiar, right? Which is a way of saying you can try to find in the voice of the bird that which is you. And then you're surprised by the things you find. But then I had other people who work in this class with me did something brilliant, and they used the bird songs as dream words. This is based on a 14th century Arabic idea of, and then it's widespread in the Sufi world or Muslim world, the idea that certain words, if you repeat them as you're falling asleep, they kind of improve the chances that you will have beautiful dreams. So a couple of people working with me did this of playing the recordings of my bird voices as they were falling asleep, and then they registered their dreams, and the results were absolutely spectacular. Going back to that sense of something that exists or is transmitted in a purely poetic way. There were all these beautiful images, and so perhaps with this, I'm trying to say there is a way of listening that is conscious. You could listen to see this sounds like this sounds like that. There is a rhythm, there is pattern. I'm pretty sure that people will be able, like Olivier Messiaen, this French composer, to write down like the notation for the song of a bird. But there is another way of listening that maybe is more unconscious, the listening when you're not listening.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a you hear the song, right? You become aware of the song, and at some point in the transition to noticing the space in the song or in art or whatever, there's almost like an inversion that starts to happen, where we get pulled inside of something else, right?
Yes.
It's that hole in the card all of a sudden, right? The card being the song, and we're looking at it, we're seeing the pattern and the things, and then at some point we notice that there's an opening. And if we're in the receptive mindset to that, not sitting with expectation and anticipation, we can fall through that like Alice through the rabbit hole and so on, and end up in another world, and where our experiences are different, are poetic, but also inspire a sense of connection to ourselves and so on.
Yes, I mean, it's like walking by the sea. You walk by the sea, and the sea now and then it brings something to the shore, and you pick it up and you say, this is fantastic, or this is horrible, to throw it back. But you can't command the sea to drop on your lap what you want.
Yes.
You have to figure out how to use what the sea is just put in there.
Sure.
So I find
you
that
can't command the pigeon to drop a branch in your hands, right?
Exactly.
But if you're listening,
yes, if you're there, you're paying attention, then that's a miracle, And but also that's something else that happened this weekend. I was about to have lunch with my son, and I heard this crow, and I looked up, and I realized what I saw was a bald eagle.
Okay.
Which was, and it was gigantic. And then I kept hearing this crow, and it was so strange. So I moved around the tree, and I saw that this crow that now looked like a fly next to the eagle was trying to chase the eagle out of the tree, which is what they do, is their job, basically.
Yeah.
But so, and then of course there was a moment when my wife, wives always do the same things. Something is happening. Two people are having an argument, an eagle and a crow, and a crow, and then your wife will say, "Go do something. Talk to the guy." So I went and I talked to the crow, and I managed to make him stop for a while. But and then we went in to have lunch. But this is the thing. This was the dining hall in this college my son goes to.
Yeah.
And as soon as I entered, and my son was inside, and as soon as I told him there is a bald eagle outside, every single kid in that dining hall dropped everything and ran out. I never expected that reaction. There was no social media involved. There was just the absolute, the excitement was, again, like by saying there is a bald eagle outside, it was like I pressed an emotional button that was completely irrational. They didn't even hesitate or figure out. They just dropped the trays with the food and ran out.
Yeah.
And I felt again that they understand that's a miracle. That thing out there, which is basically an object that fell off the symbolic world, and for a moment is there on a tree. It's a miracle. And that's a choice. And I think that signs are always based on choice. We choose to activate or deactivate a sign. We choose to acknowledge this is a sign. You could have passed by that nest with the 3 eggs and ignore that completely or kick it even.
Yeah.
But you decided, you choose to pay attention to it in just a way that that prepare you to be then aware of the pigeon with the branch.
Yeah.
And
in the same way as choosing to go and walk by the ocean, if we persist in that practice, then the ocean will give us signs.
Yes,
because we're there.
Everything gives you absolutely, and be present is the presence is meaning, and that. But the word you just use is a practice, and of course, again, in time, you will feel that the sea is giving you things all the time, and it's not necessarily true. Maybe there were a few weeks in between or months. But you are in your practice, so that practice makes reality speak to you in a seemingly constant way.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Jason Miller wrote a piece about. I'll try and include a link in the show notes. I think the title was something like "Your practice doesn't care if you feel like it," and the sort of gist of it was around devotional work, that it doesn't matter if you're in the mood or not. If you've made a commitment, you should show up and do the thing anyway.
Yes.
And whether a thing comes from it or not, whether you feel better because of it or not, that in many ways, the power of devotion and sort of offerings and in the context of deity work is in your consistency and your persistence over time. And I think that in the same way, I had a lovely bike ride back from meeting my girlfriend for coffee today, and I didn't have any miraculous occurrences. It was a nice bike ride, but the moon wasn't out. It was kind of whatever. but that attention is always there, so that when those things do wash up on the shore, I can pick them up, right? You know, and I think that sort of endeavoring to be open to that at a basic level consistently is what also produces it, right?
Yes, and I mean, we have to be open, and again, we have to accept the dignity of whatever that is. It may not be what we want, or it may not be something. Actually, I think the whole point is for it to be surprising.
Yes.
For it to be something we're not expecting. Otherwise, I mean, if it's only like a confirmation of bias, then what's the point? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, that, you know, I think a lot about cascarilla, you know, this thing, the
sure. Efun, powdered eggshell.
You know,
yeah.
Yes, eggshell. I mean, I love this idea of kind of grounding eggshells to a powder that you can use to draw things with, and somehow with those drawings you call on something, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that I like to think that, I mean, a friend of mine say that I draw a magic circle around this cafe I go every day. That's my magic circle.
Uh-huh.
And I like the idea that routine is like this cascarilla. Routine is like grounding this eggshell to a powder. You do it over and over and over and over. And basically, yes, it comes to a point in which your routine drew a magic circle around you. And then these things are happening there because basically you are there. Yeah, as you say, they happen because you show up. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm sure that there are wonderful things happening when nobody's watching.
For sure.
And when we don't show up.
Yeah.
But
when you went inside the bald eagle and the crow said, "Whew, I'm glad they left. We can put this aside for a minute."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that's also beautiful to think that. I mean, to think of all the signs that are taking place in our absence mm-hmm. is also something that fills me with joy.
Yeah. No, I love it.
All the things are not for me.
Well, maybe that's a great place to wrap it up for this conversation. Go practice.
Yes.
Go grind it down. Go make it sacred, magical, or poetic, or whatever you prefer, and listen.
Yeah.
And you'll see what shows up.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I do. I don't know why I prefer poetic because perhaps it makes it more concrete. Mm-hmm. But at the end, it's all the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thanks for recording another one of these, my friend.
No, thank you. It's always so good to see you.
Yeah, you
come
too.
to New York.
It's on my agenda for sure.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. Another episode in the bag. Seems like 107 struck me as a particularly large number for some reason this time. Patreon bonus is available and up for those who are already pledging. For anybody who wants to become a supporter, you get access to the current one and the growing library of previous ones, as well as anybody who supports the Patreon at whatever level also gets 24 hours early access to the podcast and all the material. And there will be that group I mentioned coming in April. So spread the word, sign up, help this lovely little podcast that I've been working on flourish. It's deeply appreciated. I will talk to you soon.